The United States and the UK struck 18 Houthi targets in Yemen in an answer to the recent surge in attacks by the militia group on ships in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden. This includes a missile strike this past week that set fire to a cargo vessel. According to the US officials, American and British fighter jets hit sites in 8 locations, targeting missiles, launchers, rockets, drones, and air defense systems. This is the 4th time that the US and British militaries have conducted a combined operation against the Houthi militias since January 12th. The strikes have support from the wider coalition, which includes Australia, Bahrain, Canada, Denmark, the Netherlands, and New Zealand. Former U.S. President and Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump has won South Carolina's Republican primary, beating his last major Republican rival and former United Nations Ambassador Nikki Haley in her home turf. This victory comes at a time when Donald Trump has already swept Iowa caucus and GOPs in New Hampshire and Nevada. The former president's latest victory Tuesday will increase pressure on Nikki Haley to leave the race to the White House, who was South Carolina governor from 2011 to 2017. Speaking at his victory speech, Trump said, and I quote, "I have never seen the Republican Party so unified as it is right now." After losing the primary battle in her home state, South Carolina, former governor and Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley vowed that she will keep fighting and stay in the race. Donald Trump won South Carolina's Republican primary and beat former United Nations Ambassador Nikki Haley in her home turf and consolidated his path to a 3rd straight GOP nomination. Addressing her supporters, Haley said, and I quote, "I said earlier this week that no matter what happens in South Carolina, I would continue to run. I'm a woman of my word." US President Joe Biden's approval ratings have hit a low point. As per the latest Gallup poll, Biden's approval rating fell to 38% this month. This approval rating is just 1 percentage point away from his all-time low. A majority of US voters are unhappy with Joe Biden's administration. The poll, in which over 1,000 Americans participated, says that only 38% of respondents approve of Biden's presidency, while a majority of 59% disapprove of his role as a president. This poll data was recorded from the 1st of February till the 20th of February. This poll comes amid the growing concerns about Joe Biden's age. Recently, Joe Biden has been using note cards in closed-door fundraisers. This move that is raising eyebrows whether the 81-year-old can handle the rigorous campaigns ahead of the elections. French President Emmanuel Macron was greeted with boos and whistles at the opening of the Paris agricultural fair by angry farmers who blame him for not doing enough to support them. Macron was scheduled to visit the event. Dozens of protesters forced their way into the security barriers and entered the site before the official opening and the president's planned visit. The farmers have been protesting for months across France to demand better living conditions, simpler regulations, and competition from foreign imports. Hundreds gathered in central London on Saturday to show their support for Ukraine on the 2nd anniversary, that is on the 3rd anniversary of Russia's invasion of the country. The protesters were wrapped in Ukrainian flags and holding banners reading "Putin, get out of Ukraine." As the war enters its 3rd year, Russian forces held around 18% of Ukraine's landmass and are mounting new offensives in the east, buoyed by the capture of the ruined town of Avdiivka last weekend. Exhausted by 2 years of fighting, Ukraine's government faces numerous challenges. Kiev is trying to rally continued support from its Western allies as it runs critically short of artillery rounds, and US attempts to supply military assistance are hobbled by Republicans. Hundreds of demonstrators rallied in Greece's capital, Athens, on Saturday to show their support for the people of Ukraine on their third anniversary of Russia's military invasion on the war-torn nation. Demonstrators, including many Ukrainian expatriates, marched in the Greek capital holding signs, placards, and waving a large Ukrainian flag. Russia's invasion of Ukraine started the deadliest war on European soil in more than 70 years. Hundreds of Ukrainians, Russians, and Belarusians attended a rally in the Georgian capital of Tbilisi, denouncing Russian President Vladimir Putin and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The protesters held placards and chanted slogans chanting "Glory to Ukraine, glory to heroes." The placards held by the protesters read, "Russia is a terrorist state and Russia kills people and freedom."
Свою роль в мире, подтвердить.
Наші герої мають вже сьогодні бути раді.
As the Russia-Ukraine war enters its third year, setbacks in the east have left Ukraine's army looking vulnerable, seeking to maintain Western focus on Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky has warned that Putin may not stop at Ukraine's borders if he emerges victorious. Russian President Putin dismissed such claims and casts the war as a wider struggle with the United States, which he says aims to dismantle Russia. During an unannounced visit to Odessa, German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock said that her country was still discussing whether to supply long-range weapons to Ukraine. Ukrainian leaders have been pushing their Western counterparts to deliver new weapons systems, above all longer-range missiles to strike farther behind Russian lines. German lawmakers approved further military support for Ukraine on February 22nd, including long-range weapon systems, but rejected a call by the opposition to deliver Taurus cruise missiles to Kiev. German officials have raised concerns that the missiles could escalate the war inside Russian territory and could be seen as a more direct German involvement in the conflict. Pentagon is carrying out criminal probes in over 50 cases related to aid provided to Kiev. This comes amid the United States being largest donor of aid to Ukraine since the war began. Now, according to Pentagon's Inspector General, the investigation is related to procurement fraud, product substitution, theft, and diversion. More investigations into abuse or diversion of U.S. equipment could also follow up. U.S. State Department and U.S. Agency for International Development, along with Pentagon, have been auditing aid and funds provided to Ukraine worth around $113 billion. All the amount transferred as part of U.S.-led Atlantic Resolve effort to dislodge Russia has not been spent yet. The body of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny has been handed over to his mother. The news of his death comes at a time when the country is in the middle of a full-scale war and the presidential election is due next month. Navalny was the last public politician to pose a real challenge to Putin's regime, but his attempt to overthrow Putin failed long before what appears to be his untimely death in prison. Within Russia, Navalny is seen as irrepressible in his ability to connect and to mobilize. Most of his allies are now in exile, and the Kremlin's stranglehold on the digital public square is tighter than ever. There is a new entry to Iran's presidential race. He's an Iranian social media comedian called Iraj Maleki. Maleki will be representing the western province of Kermanshah in the chamber and has fulfilled all legal and educational prerequisites of the parliamentary race. After the Islamic Republic's Guardian Council approved his qualification, his candidacy drew mixed reactions from the public. Iran's 290-seat legislature will head to the polls on the 1st of March. A total of 15,200 candidates will compete in the race for the country's parliament. Some opposition figures have either boycotted the elections or have dropped out of the race, calling it ineffective, meaningless, and non-competitive. Hundreds of Israelis hit the streets and staged anti-government protests in Tel Aviv. The protest in Tel Aviv's Kaplan Junction was aimed at Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his government over its handling of the war in the Gaza Strip and its impact on relations with neighboring Arab countries. The police personnel arrested 18 people and used water cannons to disperse the agitated protesters. The protesters have been demanding Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's resignation and a fresh hostage release deal with Hamas. Hamas has previously conditioned freeing 130 hostages it still holds on Israel, freeing thousands of jailed Palestinian militants, and calling off the Gaza offensive.